business and focused on expanding their portfolio to more line of business financial services. My background is financial services, 20 plus years, buy side, sell side, all over the place, etc. Today I'm honored to have with me Anastasia, Meredith and Russell. I'd like you all to briefly introduce yourselves and then we'll delve into our topic of conversation for today. So let's start with you, Anastasia.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anastasia. I'm head of partnerships in CloseMatch, and CloseMatch is a real-time document management and workflow software. And our clients, financial institutions, use the system to manage policies and procedures and apply regulatory change on that.
Thank you. Meredith.
Hi, I'm Meredith Moss. I'm the CEO of Phenomial. Phenomial is a software platform. We automate the client onboarding process in financial services industry, which is incredibly broad process based on regulation. So excited to talk about that today.
Russell.
Hello, my name is Russell Perry. I'm the CEO and the founder of Company. That's Company with a K. We're a global regulatory technology platform for global business verification, KYC, and AML.
Thank you. Okay, so, today's session is about managing the growing weight of compliance. Compliance is nothing new for us in this sector, especially around AML requirements, etc. We're seeing the emergence of RegTechs, and we had a laugh about this before. People don't know if it's RegTech or RegTech, and I keep going on, it's regulation, not regulation, etc. But we're seeing an emergence of these little groups that are helping to address the regulatory issues with the help of technologies, and each one of your organizations actually do that. So, but what I want to know is we're seeing the shift in compliance, and as we move forward within financial services, there's so much regulatory change, uncertainty, etc. But from your perspective, what are the challenges that your organization is seeing? So I'm going to start with you, Anastasia, and just a bit of background about what CloseMatch does and kind of the challenges from a regulatory and compliance perspective, and then we'll continue the dialogue from there.
So the most interesting aspect at present for me, or the challenges that I'm looking at present, are not necessarily around the volume of regulatory changes. Yes, there are lots of them, but that's pretty much been fairly consistent over the last 5 or so years. We see all those statistics from Thomson Reuters every year. So,
but if I read another Gartner report, I'm going to get myself.
But it's quite interesting. What I'm observing with our clients is that we've gone through very big, at least in Europe, very big regulatory reforms over the last 5 years. We've got MiFID, we had Solvency II for insurance, we had market abuse, we had GDPR, a senior management regime going on right now over the year now. And the interesting piece of it is that all of those implementations and compliance to those legislations have been done or implemented quite quickly, patchy, not solid all the way and efficiently. And it's really interesting, while there's no major legislative initiatives in the next few years, really, there is a major drive to go back and look at what has been implemented and introduce efficiencies and more solid processes across the organization, and that's what we see a lot.
That's what we see. Fantastic. Before I hand it to you, Meredith, I think one of the things that I see and what frustrates me, and I think I was moaning about this backstage, is that we're still at a stage where we're talking about trends in RegTech and financial services and digital transformation projects and how are we going to do this and how are we going to do that. The reality is the rate the technology is actually evolving and moving, and I like to call them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, like big tech giants that we have. The technology that they have and the levels that they have. But with incumbent banks and financial services institutions, we're still faffing around with Excel spreadsheets and tactical solutions and looking at projects to see whether we're going to actually fund this or that. It's a reality that, you need to shape up or ship out. So what do you see? Is that something similar? Because, it frustrates me. We're still looking at upcoming trends in 2019. We've been doing this for 5 years. Right. So what's your perspective? And what does your organization kind of see as a challenge?
Absolutely. I think you hit right on it, Nirvana, in that organizations are doing many of their compliance processes via Excel spreadsheets. And that includes the focus of Phenomial. We have some kind of nice things in common with Russell and company, but in the AML KYC space, the client onboarding process is generally still not only driven by spreadsheets, but also by email, by PDF documents, and there are regulatory and legal requirements which make that the case. So I think the challenge is that for an individual organization to make the decision to use technology to solve that problem, but you also addressed exactly sort of the challenge in that, which is that the regulations are changing so quickly that by the time an organization sort of builds out a technology platform to address the latest requirements, it's changed. And we're talking with top 5 global bank about this exact problem. They've built this platform and they've rolled it out to in the US, UK, and Singapore, and they've got a long tail of other countries that they need to put onto the platform, and they're not going to be able to do it with their existing technology, the process for writing use cases and building out software, and that's where sort of technology innovators come to play. But I'll also say that that's the challenge that an organization has internally. On the other side of that are governments. And governments, I think this is sort of a sleeper that we talked about in advance, which is that the OECD, as well as the US, standing alone, sadly, as usual, have put in place standards for reporting on every single account holder in the organization. And so on the one hand are global regulators who've made created an XML standard for regulatory reporting on account holders, and on the other side are the organizations who are struggling to comply with that with Excel spreadsheets and homegrown systems. And so I think that's where the adoption of RegTech really comes in.
Also with that, you've got silos within organizations as well. So you mentioned, Anastasia, there's like multiple regulations. Each one of these have different regulatory reporting requirements, for example, MiFID, EMIR, SFTR, whatever, right? There's a team for each one of these. They don't communicate with each other, right? So that's another challenge, and they're all siloed tactical processes. Russell, what's your view on this? And I guess how is your organization seeing the challenges as well?
Well, most of our customers are, of course, in the financial industry, right? But more and more also in insurance, et cetera, because the regulations are quite similar. What we're seeing right now is that when it comes to the business verification, and that's what our focus is, there are 2 trends right now. One is, we want to be digital, we need to find a way to automate. Okay, that's one thing we can work on, right? That's why regulatory technology can enable that process and that step to a digital. I'm not talking about Excel sheets, I'm talking about automation and digital at the same time. Yeah. And the second trend is moving away from static information to dynamic information that also has a level of authority, or let's call it audit-proof business information. One of the challenges, though, is that these 2 trends in the industry are not being deployed or even planned at the same speed. So there is a disconnect between the digitalization automation and the move to dynamic data and authoritative information. And when we look at the clients, they are struggling with that because of the siloed approach. There might be one part of the business, and there might be 2,000 people working on the onboarding and the KYC that want to go digital. And then you have the compliance groups that are saying, hold on a minute, but the data you're using cannot be used because of new regulation and new requirements and our internal risk requirements, et cetera. So, but from an industry standpoint, and if we stay with the financial industry, we have the large organizations, the large and global banks that are adapting at a certain speed, trying to bring this together, but decision making is a little bit slow. At the same time, we have the mid-tier banking groups that say, we need to compete with the large organizations. We can do that by deploying technology. At the same time, the fintechs are coming and they're chewing away at the business opportunities of the mid-tier banks. So we're actually seeing mid-tier financial institutions move much quicker, because with the conversations that we're having, they're saying, look, we have pressure from the top and pressure from the bottom. Right? But at the same time, if we can actually automate and we can move towards the next generation of tools, we can actually service our customers better, so we're not seeing regulation as a burden anymore, but because we're managing it actively through RegTech, we can be more competitive, service our customers quicker, and actually stabilize, the boundaries of the top and the bottom groups and so forth, eating into their business.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a conversation that I have a lot with my stakeholders internally and when I speak to our clients, etc. And we were talking again about, we had a lot of discussions backstage today before this. But I said one of the frustrations for me is that this shift is happening whether we like it or not. Automation will only help enable us and make our jobs easier. But it's an ecosystem-wide effort, and it takes collaboration, not just for banks or techs independently. It's the whole ecosystem. It's the regulators being around the table. It's the banks, the buy side, the sell side, the venues, etc., to solve for these challenges. And also internally in organizations, I'm from a tech company right now, and as an innovative tech company, we still have those challenges internally. I speak to regulators, they have challenges internally to get the buy-in of their key stakeholders to, well, this is a new thing, we've never done it this way before, how is this going to move? And then you've also got, well, it's regulation, we want to keep away from that. As a tech company, I hear that quite a lot. It's financial services we're dealing with, not regulation. I'm like, excuse me, it's a heavily regulated industry. You need to understand that. And I think one of the things that I say, and I agree with what Russell just said, is that, looking at regulation and the box it puts around everything, it might seem like a big black box, but actually it's an opportunity. So, it's all about the data, and within organizations, for example, once you have that compliance and process and procedures in place and have used the automotive solutions to harness everything, then you can actually look at monetizing and looking at the opportunities and taking the costs associated with regulations away. So, Anastasia, coming towards you, and I think more focusing, because I think the topic of this is more around the AML, KYC challenges that we're seeing right now. Your organization, how are you seeing the stakeholder buy-in when you talk to clients, and how are you helping industry to move forward in that? And again, around the challenges, how are you trying to solve for some of those challenges in these areas by using your solutions, etc.?
I guess I'll echo what you just said, so I'm not sure I should repeat it again.
It's a similar challenge. One of the things that we have is, for example, the GDPR. That's not specific to financial services, but it hits every single type of regulation out there and industry as well. So as well as adhering to financial services regulations, you've got to also adhere to this thing that is going to fine you to high heavens if you don't get it right. So, it's also other challenges. So what's your thoughts on this, Meredith?
Well, GDPR is an interesting touch point for this conversation, because there is a tension in our industry, and I'm speaking from a financial services perspective, but I think it's true for all of us, even in our lives as consumers. And the tension is between transparency and privacy. So GDPR and similar regulations are around protecting the individual's right to be forgotten. And at the same time, regulators want to have transparency. They want to be able to get data reported to them about the activities that are happening in the marketplace. So I think Russell really hit on something that I think is key to making this work across the industry, and that is real-time self-service of data. So in the case of Phenomial, we're focused on the real-time self-service of counterparty data, so particularly on the buy side, investors or counterparties being able to manage their own data and permission it. And I think from Russell's perspective at company, it'd be interesting to hear, but it's very similar in terms of identity verification. So I think it's only by putting control of the data into the hands of those who own the data that we can get to RegTech solutions that work for the industry. But I guess I'll also disagree, because it makes panels so much more fun if we disagree, that with Nirvana's point about the ecosystem, and that is that although I'd consider myself on the left side of most policies, I believe that it's in the capitalist market, ecosystem solutions or consortium solutions aren't going to solve it. It's only going to be down to the organization.
No, that's not what I mean about ecosystem. It means that there has to. So when a regulation comes out, you know, it's going to impact a bank, it's going to impact a regulator, it's going to impact a venue. And by having them on the same page, not necessarily coming out with a solution that fits one all, that's what I'm saying. So we're still not in disagreement.
I'll try. I'll try harder. But
no, I agree with your point.
But so I think it is down to the organization, the company, deciding that they have to innovate or adopt innovative technologies just in order to keep pace with regulations, but also to serve their end clients and to differentiate so that the regulation isn't a drag on the business, but it's more of an enabler.
So I think Meredith also the point there. You know, regulation is something that can be very useful too, because it ensures that we have multiple players, be it on the business side, be it, you know, the citizens, the consumer at the end of the day, but also the regulators have access to information. And that information obviously can help regulate, you know, the markets, help regulate also, and ensure that we can pinpoint, you know, bad actors. Because bad actors, no matter if it's a totally free market economy or regulated, bad actors destroy any system, right? But if we look at it this way, and maybe that is also the idea that we were discussing about ecosystem. It's not just about the institutions. It's not just about maybe also unregulated industry. It's really about the regulators, the market participants, the end consumers, those that benefit, and environments, right? And think about it this way. If you had the possibility on business KYC, and you have onboarding by a financial institution, and they've automated it, they're using audit-proof information, but at the same time, they have given permission to the financial regulator to have a view on the credentials of that entity. So you would say, oh, but we don't want to share that information with the regulator. But what if it would actually be the other way around, where if the regulator would not only in a post-fact world then come and penalize the bank or the financial institution for violating some laws, but to say, oh, wait a minute, we have noticed you've set up an account, there's transactions of hundreds of millions of dollars going back and forth with these counterparties, these entities, and you need to be careful because we know that there are some dubious transactions or the people behind the entities to actually not come in only as a regulation, but help also the financial institutions identify problem accounts before something actually happens, but only with a small window into the data set. Not everything, obviously, because every bank, every financial institution has proprietary information. Absolutely fine. But instead of only having a regulator that is imposing fines, why not have one that actually regulates actively?
Yeah. So actually, to your point, I mean, I work very closely with regulators and industry, and it's when I talk about the ecosystem, I've opened a whole can of worms here, but when I talk about that, it's exactly in the context of what Russell just said. When we talk to the regulators or the banks or the buy sides, etc., there are common problems that we have to solve for, whether it's reporting, KYC, AML requirements, etc. Having these players in the same room at the same time doesn't mean we're going to come out with one set solutions. However, the regulator can be there not to veto anything or say yay or nay, but actually to a certain extent get their head around the technology and how that applies and how it works, test their policies against some of the technology before it becomes regulation. And I've done a lot of that with them. You know, I take them back to our offices back in Japan to kind of just sit down, have a look at some of the technology that we have. This is what it does. and this is how it could help and how it evolves. So it's from that perspective. Now, did you have a further thing to add?
I think that's, you're so right that there is a need to kind of educate the regulators about the technology, because today in really every jurisdiction, the standard for regulators is that an institution has to have written policies and procedures. And I think that this notion of written policies and procedures and sort of a spot check of those policies and procedures is incredibly outmoded, because anything that is in a policies and procedures document can be encapsulated in software. That's what we do in client onboarding and AML KYC at Phenomial. And so when the regulators sort of have this expectation of paper process and tracking in Excel, they're sort of missing the bigger opportunity, and the opportunity to say to the industry, actually, immutable audit trail is something that we expect and require, and therefore written policies and procedures no longer cuts it. But I think that's a process for the regulators to get there.
Yeah, and again, it's not just unique to the regulators, it's very much the industry. So we were talking about fintechs coming up. One of the things that I see from going from the dark to the light, or depending on the day, from technology to finance, or finance, whichever way you want to call it, is that, there's a lot of great startups and fintechs and RegTechs out there, but they don't understand the line of business requirements of a financial services institution. A lot of the good things that I'm seeing about RegTechs is actually because they come from that background, because they're coming from that, industry area, they understand the line of business and the regulatory impacts and challenges that a financial services organization has. And that's really important. So again, it's not just about the regulators, etc. I don't want to drone on too much about that, but what I do want to talk about next, I guess we've talked about the challenges, and stakeholder buy-in, etc. I want to talk about, okay, how can we solve challenges? And how can we help people with these challenges moving forward around the AML space and, KYC, etc. How are your organizations helping with the processes going forward? And Anastasia, I mean, if I want to know, what does
more than I usually do.
well, you and I have worked in industry together for many years, so I want to kind of know, how is Clause Match seeing that? I mean, you're seeing it from that perspective, and how are you helping it? And what are the issues that you're seeing?
So just to go back on just a little bit, taking a loop on collaboration and making sure everybody participates and discusses and takes part in the overall conversation. My biggest concern is that in theory it works, in practice it doesn't, and usually trying to have multiple parties to collaborate very often doesn't lead to a very successful result or a very lengthy time to get to that result. So sometimes you just have to take action. With that said, a holistic approach to regulatory compliance includes regulatory data, which is what we seem to be discussing quite a lot nowadays, but also regulatory technology. And technology plays just as big of a part, and specialists in different areas in engineering and development are absolutely crucial in that, right? So it's quite interesting to see regulatory reporting requirements that are very specific on the use of specific data points are evolving to technologies that are analyzing semantically and contextually sentiment across things, and that's helping regulators to see what effect regulations have on the industry. So it's not always about reporting, it's about installing governance and the intent of legislations that the regulators pass, making sure that that's actually passing on to the culture of the organizations and the way they operate as businesses, and that's compliance as well, and that's exactly what we're trying to help organizations do.
Fantastic. What about you, Russell? How is your organization seeing this?
Well, maybe just a quick step back. Some of the, talk about regulated industry, but they have the same problems as some of our clients from like the automotive industry. So it's actually not just the FI sector, right? And we are always, on the cusp of what's the next generation, what technology we can deploy, what is the next feature, what's the next, solution. But sometimes it's really about the basic needs of the teams that are engaging. Think about it this way, with new regulation coming in, like the 4th Anti-Money Laundering Directive or MiFID II in the EU, one of the biggest challenges was the backlog of client cases. It wasn't about how are we going to manage it, or we don't have the team that understands it, and so forth, but it was like, it's a backlog problem because it takes too long to actually go through the whole onboarding. And one of our clients it was about MiFID II, one of our clients had more than 10,000 clients backlog before January 2nd, 2018 it was?
Yeah.
It was 2018.
It was delayed.
2018. And they pretty much had 4 weeks to issue a LEI number, legal entity identifier, to 10,000 funds. Weeks, right? So we went from the first meeting, right, to the contract negotiation, testing, implementation, and go live, and we were able, and then work on the backlog before the 31st of December, right? And it was just about the backlog. And then the challenge really happens like, but now all the new ones are coming. We have to make sure we can onboard them digitally as well. Yeah. So sometimes it's the basics, not necessarily the next generation of features and technology. It's really the problems today.
Thank you. You had something.
But that's what I mean about collaboration. LEI is a great example. Just to get to the LEI standard was a whole exercise of multiple years of multiple parties collaborating to agree to what was phase 1, right?
But it's across industries. It's like that. In organizations, it's like that. And it never. Sometimes you feel like you're doing something. Striving for peace in the Middle East or something. It's that difficult. But the results of it, we've seen positive outcomes as well. So like the tech sprints, for example, where suddenly it becomes a part of the government's fintech agenda, etc. So those are important. Meredith, just your views on that. And I want to take the last couple of minutes to see if anyone has any questions, and then we'll have some final thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to your question of how are we solving the issue, and sort of bringing it to kind of the what we can all do about it. I think that the regulations impose a burden. We often lose sight of the bigger picture, sort of why we're doing this. As Russell brought up, we want a fair and transparent marketplace. That's how capitalism works best. But solving for the regulatory compliance challenges leads to other business benefits. So the business benefit of accelerating time to revenue when you're bringing new clients on board, and the account opening process, or creating a better experience for the client when they're engaging with you, even when they're engaging around relatively sort of low value interactions like could we have you confirm your tax status this year? So I think that if approached right, firms can deliver business value as they're complying with regulations. And I think that's the opportunity that RegTech also brings to the market, to not just the large tier, but the middle tier, who are more nimble in making decisions, so they can bring technologies on board that then enable them to be in a more competitive position. And that sort of, it's lucky to quote from a client call this morning, on the broker-dealer side, where if you're not a sort of top 8 broker-dealer, you need to find ways to differentiate and innovate. And it's sort of counterintuitive, but taking a technology approach to solving RegTech can actually help smaller firms compete.
But it has to be technology because it's
It does.
RegTech. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from anybody? No? Going once? Going twice? Well, in that case, I'd like to thank my panelists. Any final thoughts from each one of you? Other than, oh my God, Ned.
No, I think I would just like to share that what we always say, RegTech enables.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah. I do think it's helpful just to remember, even when you're considering adopting RegTech or sort of evangelizing within your own organization about compliance and about how to solve a problem, bringing it back to the bigger picture of the function that the regulation is supposed to achieve and how that aligns with the firm's values and also the firm's business model, I think is a helpful way to go. It's not easy to, I think most of us in this room are the ones championing compliance, but it's not hard. It's not easy to get compliance done in the organization.
Yeah,
So bringing those the business benefits and sort of the higher purpose actually matters.
Thank you. Anastasia.
Well, I'll just keep it to short and brief, just like Russell just did. Evolve with your compliance.
What?
Evolve with your compliance.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we've got some really good taglines today. Thank you all so much for your time. I hope that was useful for you. Thank you to my great panelists for your time and your very informative insights. Thank you.